Welcome back, everybody. It is Saturday, November 5th, and this is the Kota Capper's College Football Computer Show, Episode 7. I'm Kota Capper Pace. Alongside me, like every single episode, is Dan Angel 11, the computer man. Dan, how are we doing here this Saturday?
It's been quite a week. I'm excited to get to enjoy some football this weekend.
Absolutely. We've obviously had football what seems like every single day, I think, I believe if you throw in the NFL there on Monday as well. So it's definitely been a full week, and we are excited to get rolling here on Saturday with a pretty decent slate of games here, Dan. So we'll just start in the ACC. Of course, if you don't know what the show is about, all of our links are in the description. Dan does a great job with the computer rankings, so make sure to follow him on Twitter. And if you want to read more about what the computer rankings are, you can obviously follow along this episode, or like I said, links are all in the description on how Dan gets all this. So Dan, dead start in the ACC last week, 3-3 straight up, 2-3-1 against the spread. Let's start here with Virginia Tech -3, and the computer has them by 5 over Georgia Tech.
Yeah, so this is basically desperation time for both of these programs. Virginia Tech is really not that strong on offense at all, but they have been doing a decent job of actually staying in games the last couple weeks against Miami and NC State. If they're going to get any wins in the ACC, this is probably the time for them to do it, because going to Duke is looking like that's going to be a tough game now, especially with Duke on the cusp of bowl eligibility. I think by the time we've finished taping this show, they'll have gotten it because they're playing Friday night against Boston College. But I don't think they win that game. They'll probably beat Virginia just because they always beat Virginia. But yeah, this Virginia Tech team has been a real disappointment this year. But I do think that they have enough to get by a Georgia Tech team that really is just not very good.
Dan, do you believe in this team? This blank team is Duke. Do you believe in that, or do you look at that, or not so much?
Duke. It's been a weird year for Duke. They've lost a couple games that they shouldn't have. They had no business losing that game to Georgia Tech, but they've also won a few games that were pretty decent showings. So beating Miami by 24 points last week, that was pretty solid. And I think Duke, they blew their shot at the Coastal Division title in losing that game, but I think there's a good shot that Duke finishes with 7 wins and ends up in a bowl game, which would be a huge first year for Mike Elko.
Oh, it'd be huge. I remember when we did the show drafting the college football teams. Some people got stuck with Duke, and they're like, that's an automatic L right there, and they're looking pretty good so far this season. So
yeah, turned out Northwestern was the one you wanted to avoid.
How about that? Kansas and Duke you wanted, Northwestern you did not want. Let's go to the next game here in the ACC. We have Louisville. I know some people fade Louisville here, taking on James Madison. Louisville -7, but the computer likes them by 13 over JMU. What do you like here, Dan?
So I'm a little worried here because I did make Madison my upset of the week on the weekly show. Louisville, Scott Satterfield just has a weird history of losing games that he shouldn't. This Cardinal team, they're 5-3, and there's not a good loss in there. You look at what Louisville has done this season, and they managed to lose to Boston College somehow, which it really takes a lot to lose to that Boston College team. Pretty sure that they had another pratfall in there against somebody. My internet's being a bit slow. There we go. Okay, they lost to Syracuse, and Syracuse turned out to be a lot better than anyone expected, but losing by 24 to that Syracuse team, not acceptable. The only game that they've lost that was at least decent was losing by 4 to Florida State. Otherwise, this team has been a real disappointment in certain games. They have won their last 3, but Virginia's not very good. Pittsburgh's not very good, and Wake Forest, they put it all together in that game, but Wake Forest always has one of those weird games every year. So there's a real chance Madison can pull this off.
Yeah, should be a good game. You took them as your upset, you said?
Yeah, I did, which basically means with my history, I have hit one now, but with my history on the upsets, bet the farm on Louisville.
There we go. Caution with Dan's upset there. All right, let's go to the Big 12. Last week, 1-3 straight up, 1-3 against the spread. Baylor +3 here, but the computer likes them by 8 over Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think the computer is still overreacting a little to Oklahoma's 2-week stretch where the Sooners just looked like they did not belong in the Big 12 at all. So I don't know. I mean, the computer was very impressed by Baylor whacking Texas Tech last week. I think there's a good chance that Baylor does cover the 3. Do they win by 8? I'm not sure. I do think that Baylor is the better team, though. And yeah, I think +3 with the Bears is a pretty good move.
Sounds good. Iowa State -7 here. The computer likes them by 11 over the Mountaineers of West Virginia. What do you like here?
Yeah, so with Iowa State, the computer has loved them basically since they beat Iowa, which Iowa, of course, not anywhere near as good as it usually is, but at the time, that was a pretty good win. I would have thought the love affair with Iowa State would have been over after the Cyclones got routed by Oklahoma last week. But West Virginia just has not been all that good, and especially away from Morgantown. So with the Mountaineers going to Ames, if Iowa State doesn't win this game, they're probably going 0-9 in the Big 12.
Oof, that'd be rough. The Big Ten here, Dan. Last week, 5-0 straight up. Good to see. And against the spread, very solid too. 3-1-1 against the spread. Finally. We've been waiting for this. So let's go to Minnesota here. -16, but the computer likes them by 12 over Nebraska. I believe Nebraska's starting quarterback is out too, Dan. I know injuries aren't, taken care of here, but that is something to look at if you are going to bet this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Minnesota, they've had a couple head scratchers because they always do, which makes them a very difficult team for the computer to get a read on. But they looked very good against Rutgers on this past week. And I think Minnesota is just a stronger team than Nebraska. Like, obviously, the pressure is on in Lincoln for Mickey Joseph trying to get this job and become the long-term solution for Nebraska. I don't think that it's going to end up happening for the Huskers. I think Minnesota is the stronger team. And I think that the over is probably going to be what happens here. I'm a little worried about taking the spread, given that the computer does disagree with taking Minnesota here, and I just don't know if Nebraska can stick with the Gophers. So if I play this one, I'm probably going to look to the over.
Okay, sounds good. Dan, thoughts on Matt Rule to Nebraska? Is that a good fit?
Ooh, I mean, that could work out pretty well if they're able to get him in. I don't really know what his history is as far as where he's recruited. It looks like he's focused on Pennsylvania mostly, which that might work. I mean, Corey and I have discussed this many times on every show that we've been on together, because obviously Corey is a huge Nebraska fan, and my thinking is that when Nebraska left the Big 12, they didn't realize what it would do to their recruiting, because Nebraska historically has been able to recruit the Midwest and especially Texas, and now the Huskers aren't playing there ever. Mm-hmm. So Nebraska has to do one of two things. They either need to schedule some of these American teams like the SMUs of the world in a 2-for-1 situation, or even a home and home, so they get a presence in Texas again, or they've got to fully embrace, okay, we're part of the Big Ten now. We need to recruit the upper Midwest. And Matt Rule, being from Pennsylvania, I mean, he might be able to get into those high schools, and he does have a proven track record of winning everywhere he's been in college. So it could work out, but there's so many things that have gone wrong in Nebraska for the last 20 years that, I mean, you just don't know what's going to happen anymore.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's go to Illinois here, -17. The computer likes them by 15 over Michigan State here, Dan.
Yeah, I think this is one where Illinois might get caught sleeping a little bit on a Michigan State team that isn't good, but isn't completely horrible. I mean, the Spartans are a desperate team because they're 3-5, and they pretty much are on the ropes as far as bowl eligibility goes. And Illinois, I think there's a very good chance that the Illini get caught looking ahead a little bit to Purdue, because that game is basically for the Big Ten West title. I mean, Illinois is now 4-1 in the league. If they can get this win, which I do think they will win the game, I just think it'll be a little closer than the book suggest. If they get this win and they beat Purdue, they're on their way to Indianapolis. I mean, granted, they're probably going to get whacked by either Michigan or Ohio State when they get there, but being there at all would be a huge accomplishment for Brett Beal and his team.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think this feels closer to where the computer has it, though. I think Michigan State will compete, but I think Illinois will end up getting the win eventually.
Sounds good. Pac-12, 5-0 straight up, but just 1-4 against the spread. Let's go to Utah here, minus 17.5, but the computer likes them by 23 over Arizona.
Yeah, the computer is just not sold on Arizona at all. I mean, Utah, it's a tough place to play, especially at this time of year. I mean, you're playing at elevation, you're playing in colder weather, which doesn't really exist in the Pac-12 South with the exception of Colorado and Utah. So Arizona going up there, like if this game were in Tucson, the Wildcats would probably have a pretty decent shot at surprising people, but playing in Salt Lake City, it's just a tough place to go, and I think Utah comes out with a really comfortable win here.
Sounds good. Washington State, minus 4.5. The computer likes them by a touchdown over Stanford.
Yeah, so the computer has been higher on Washington State than the books for pretty much all year long, and that's because Washington State does a good job of actually hanging around with good teams, and they tend to beat the teams that they're supposed to. Like, you look at Washington State's schedule and you see a team that's 1-4 in the Pac-12, but the four are Oregon, USC, Oregon State, and Utah, and they lost to Oregon and Utah by a combined 7 points. So the only team that is on there that isn't on there that would have been a tough test is UCLA. So Washington State's played about as tough a schedule as you can play in this league. I think that they will handle Stanford. I don't really see any issues here.
Sounds good. That's good news for Kyle. He's going big on Washington State. So try and get back in this contest here, this college football contest. So Kyle, you got to love what Dan says there. Let's go to the SEC. Last week, 3-2 straight up, 2-3 against the spread. Let's take Georgia. Obviously, everyone's going to be watching this game. Georgia minus 8. The computer has them by a touchdown over Tennessee.
Yeah, I know. I kind of wish I could watch this game, but I'm going to be doing journalism things at Penn State, Indiana. So kicks off at the same time as this one. So I'll look at the score occasionally, but I'll be focused on what the Nittany Lions are doing. Yep. But as far as this game goes, I think Georgia's the stronger team. I mean, when Georgia wants to be, they're the best team in the country. Like, maybe Ohio State can match up with Georgia pound for pound, but I do not think Tennessee should be ranked number 1. I think Georgia is probably a touchdown better than the Vols, and the fact that it's in Athens. And on top of that, Tennessee cannot defend the pass. I mean, Georgia has a pretty good pass defense. Tennessee's pass defense is abysmal. Like, the Volunteers are getting a ton of credit because they beat Alabama at home, which, good for them. Beating Alabama anywhere is a huge win. But there's a big difference between winning at home against Alabama in a 3-point game and going down to Athens and trying to beat this Georgia defense. I don't think Tennessee can do it. And I think Stetson Bennett is going to pick apart the secondary, and I like Georgia here.
All right, that's good. It's going to be an interesting game. I don't know. I'm excited for it. So we'll kind of see what happens. It should be a fun time. Let's go South Carolina here, minus 6.5. The computer likes them by 9 over Vandy.
Yeah, so Vandy, I mean, they got off to a decent start. They're better than they have been in years past. They're still not all that good of a team. I mean, granted, it's tough to get a much of a tougher schedule than they've had in the SEC. I mean, you only get 2 games against the other division, and they managed to draw Alabama and Ole Miss. So, which Ole Miss they draw every year as a primary rival, which used to be a lot better for Vanderbilt. Now it doesn't work at all. And then the other one they get is Alabama, which enjoy. But Vandy did play well against Missouri, but I don't know if the Commodores can handle South Carolina. This one is at home, so that does give them a chance. But I think South Carolina will bounce back after really giving a terrible effort against Missouri. I think they're probably going to be embarrassed by that showing, and they'll get back on track in this game.
All right, sounds good. Let's head over to the non-Power 5 games here, Dan, to start in the American. Last week, 3-1 straight up. 2-2 against the spread. Cincinnati minus 18.5 over Navy. The computer likes them to win by 20 over Navy. Thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so Cincinnati just seems to live to disappoint on bettors. I mean,
you know well, Dan, right?
Yes, I do. I've had more than a few where the Bearcats, like, they look like they're going to cover. They have the cover under control, and then something weird happens in the final couple minutes and they get the win, but they do not cover. Like, yeah, betting on Cincinnati, not an enjoyable experience.
It's a roller coaster.
And I think this might be a situation where Navy can hang around because the strength of Cincinnati's defense is its pass defense. Navy doesn't bother to pass. So the run defense is okay, but not great. So I think Navy can hang around a little bit, and this looks like a Bearcat backdoor pretty much. We should probably trademark that.
Bearcat backdoor. I like that. Yeah, we should put it on a t-shirt. SMU -3 here. The computer likes them by 8 over Houston.
Yeah, so SMU is another one that lives to disappoint, but the Mustangs have looked a little bit better the last couple weeks. They were on the right side of a Bearcat backdoor a couple weeks ago. This one, the computer doesn't touch numbers, but this one seems to scream over because SMU moves the ball so well, but they can't stop anybody. And they're prone to head scratching situations on offense where they just commit bad turnovers and give the other team a short field. So I do think that whoever has the ball last in this situation is going to win, and I think SMU will do enough in what looks like a shootout.
Awesome. Let's go to this Conference USA here. Last week, 1-4 straight up, 1-4 against the spread. Western Kentucky, been on them a few times here. They're -16. The computer likes them dead on by 16 over Charlotte.
Yeah. So Western Kentucky, I don't know what happened last week.
Yeah.
And they were expected to do very well against North Texas, and oh dear God, they did not. I think Western Kentucky will probably cover this. Will probably cover the number because I think they come in embarrassed, and I think Charlotte kind of shot its wad last week against Rice. The 49ers are still not a good team, but they're not going to go winless in the conference. So they have that going for them. But this is a team that allows 506 yards a game, and Western Kentucky puts up numbers when everything is clicking. It hasn't been clicking for the past 2 weeks, but I think that changes this time out.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was looking at that box score. Western Kentucky, I think they had like 10 penalties, 2 turnovers. They gave up like 11 yards per pass. It was just awful. Like 40-13, yeah, I think it was, Dan, or something.
Yeah, 40-13. It just felt like 10 turnovers.
Yeah, it honestly did. It was awful. It was not a great game to watch, or to be on. Western Kentucky. Let's head to the Independents here. Last week, 2-1 straight up, 3-0 against the spread. Let's go Clemson -3.5, but the computer likes them by just 1 point over Notre Dame.
Yeah, so Notre Dame kind of ruined a fair amount of picks last week by whacking Syracuse. I think that this is going to be one that is an ugly defensive battle, and I think that really favors the Irish to get the cover. This feels like the kind of game that Clemson pulls out with a last-second field goal, probably wins it by 2 points. Like, I'm guessing that the Tigers will try and grind this out, and then they'll hit a late kick with like 30 seconds to go, and Notre Dame will end up getting frustrated again in a really tight game. But this feels like defense heavy all the way. DJ Uiagalelei just seems to be regressing a little bit. Like, he has not played well on the past couple games. He did play well against Notre Dame when he took over for Trevor Lawrence when Lawrence got COVID that one time. But I think this Irish defense is better than that defense was, and I think Notre Dame is going to keep this game close enough to get the cover, but not necessarily the win.
Sounds good. We got to touch on this game here. Air Force -7. Computer likes them by 8 over Army.
Yeah, so this one, if I add it, it's going to be as a teaser because this is just too close for me. And with Service Academy games, you really don't want to give more than a touchdown because both teams run the same offense. So both teams know exactly how to prepare for each other. Both teams know exactly how to stop the other. And that usually means under and close game, regardless of the talent level.
All right, Dan, let's head to the Mountain West here. Last week, another interesting week, 4-0 straight up, 0-4 against the spread. That started out with Utah State here, minus 14.5, but the Clear likes them by 15 over New Mexico.
Yeah, so Utah State, I mean, I do feel a little bit bad for New Mexico sports information director Frank Mercogliano, because he's been going to Utah State as a visitor for a lot of losses both at Idaho State and at New Mexico. So he's probably got to be getting sick of going to Logan by this point. I mean, this one, it looks like Utah State has the ability to attack New Mexico pretty well. The passing offense isn't great, but New Mexico's pass defense isn't very strong. And New Mexico's offense is just so weak. I mean, the Lobos have only scored 18 points their past 2 games, and one of those games was at New Mexico State, which is not exactly a strong team. So I think that if Utah State can do much of anything scoring, then it should cover. I think if I play this, I'm probably going to go New Mexico's team total under, because I'm just not confident in Utah State moving the football.
Yeah, I think that's a great play there too. I might add that to my card as well. So I like that. Fresno State here, Dan, minus 27.5, but the computer likes them by just 3 scores, 21 over Hawaii.
Yeah, so Hawaii has actually hung around a little bit with its opponents. I mean, it's still not doing all that great as far as getting wins, but it's past 4 games. They did manage to get a win over Nevada, and they lost by just 2 to San Diego State, 4 to Colorado State, and 7 to Wyoming. So this team seems to be an expert at hanging around and keeping it at least somewhat interesting. Fresno has come off 3 straight wins, but didn't look all that impressive against San Diego State. So I think that Hawaii will manage to keep this within 27 points. I don't think it's going to be all that much closer than that, but I would take the Rainbow Warriors here.
Sounds good. Rainbow Warriors, 4 straight covers, 6-3 against the spread this season. Not bad. Not bad.
Yep.
Let's head to the Sun Belt here, Dan, to wrap it up before we get into our plays for week 10. Last week, 1-3, the Sun Belt straight up, 0-4 against the spread. Let's start with Troy here, minus 4. The Clear likes them by 5 over Louisiana.
Yeah, so Louisiana has been really just a weird team. I mean, at times, Louisiana has looked very good. They came up with a really great performance against Marshall. They nearly took down South Alabama. And then they've also had moments where they've looked really poor. I mean, you called one of those when they lost to Louisiana Monroe in a 21-17 game. So I don't really know what to think about Louisiana. I do think Troy is the strongest team in the Sun Belt West this year, and Troy basically has the pressure on them because they're tied with South Alabama in this league, and even though they've got the tiebreaker, one slip up and it could all fall apart. And if they get this win, their last 2 in the league are Louisiana Monroe and Arkansas State. So if Troy is able to pull this out, they should represent the West in the Sun Belt title game. And that would actually be a really interesting battle between Troy and Coastal if Troy is able to get there. So I think Troy does do enough to get the cover here.
All right. Sounds good. Let's head to Marshall here, minus 3. The computer likes them by just 1 over Old Dominion.
Yeah. Old Dominion has been a team that has been just so hard to figure out because, I mean, they have that win over Coastal Carolina, which looks more and more like an outlier every time Coastal takes the field. And then they've managed to lose to Georgia Southern and Georgia State the past 2 weeks. So I don't really know what I'm going to get from the Monarchs each time they come out. I mean, you look at their defense, and this should have been something that Coastal should have rolled all over. So Marshall, not exactly a dominant offense, but they do have a really solid defense. So this looks like a low-scoring game, and I think I'm going to lean toward Marshall to take care of Old Dominion here, just because I really can't trust Old Dominion.
Yeah, covers over Va Tech, Virginia, Coastal. But like you said, that's their only covers.
It seems like Old Dominion just plays up to higher level competition and then just doesn't show up for the games on its own level.
Yep. Totally agree with you there. All right, Dan, let's get into our plays here. I just cannot pick a winner. I had USC last week. That didn't hit. So, here we go. You're up first, and we'll let you ride here.
Okay. So I'm a little worried that this might be a bit of an inflation from how good they looked last week and just how bad Oklahoma State looked last week. But I'm going to ride with Kansas State against Texas in Manhattan. The Wildcats are getting 2.5 points at home here, despite the fact that they just came off of smashing Oklahoma State. It might be because they beat Oklahoma State so thoroughly that people think there's going to be a regression to the mean here. But I think Kansas State is for real. And if the Wildcats can get this win, I think, let me take a look here. Yeah, this is basically for Kansas State to go to Arlington, because if they get this win, they'd have at least a 1-game lead on everybody who's behind them. I mean, their final 3 games in the league are Baylor, which would be huge because Kansas State would have to win that game to pretty much seal it, and then West Virginia and Kansas, which K-State's the better team. So if they can win this game against Texas and then beat Baylor next week, West Virginia really doesn't matter that much because Kansas State would have that tiebreaker. So they could afford to slip up in Morgantown as long as they beat the Jayhawks in Manhattan on the final day. So this game's huge for Kansas State. They want another shot at TCU. I like the Wildcats here.
I love it. Just think of Kansas State too. Was it Tulane they lost to? I mean, just don't lose to. And I know, out of conference, I get that. But
is the wicker basket.
Yeah. You did say that. You did say that. So, all right, I like it. Dan, I'm gonna go with another big spread here. I like Michigan over Rutgers. Minus 26 here, and I know the computer has them by 34, I think, or somewhere in there. I think I might have my numbers mixed up here. Let me see. Minus 26. Yeah, the computer has them by 34. The Golden Gophers just ran all over Rutgers. Michigan has probably a better rushing attack as well than the Gophers. So I think it's like top 8 in the nation. So I think Michigan can handle this easily. I know, when you go with a team that runs the ball, kind of tougher with these higher spreads, but I think at the end of the day, Michigan can get it done here, win by 28-30, and we can be on our way. So that's what I'm going to do, Dan, and I'm winning this one. I can feel it. I got to win this one.
I think there's a good chance that you win this one, mainly because I don't think Rutgers can score.
Exactly. Just score 4 touchdowns, Michigan. That's all I need.
I think this game might end 34-0 Michigan, or maybe 34-3.
Perfect. That's a win. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Dan. Anything else? Again, that's Dan Angel 11 on Twitter. I'm Kota Pace. Dan, any final thoughts here before we get rolling?
November football. It should be pretty interesting to watch.
Absolutely.
This is when everything really starts to get fun, because now every game really does matter for something.
Yep, for sure. You mentioned earlier in the show, Tennessee you didn't think was number 1, Dan, in the rankings. Anything else on that?
Yeah, I'm just not buying. I mean, I think Tennessee is certainly a top 5 team. There's no question. But for my money, Georgia's the best team when they want to be. And the only team that can really match them, I think, is Ohio State.
All right. There we go. Cool. Again, that's Dan Angel 11 on Twitter. He drops his computer rankings every single week. www.kotasportscappers.com. I'm Kota Pace. Dan, best of luck this week with your plays, and we'll see everybody next Saturday. All right. Peace.
Bye.